All right, I think we're good to go. Yeah, there's our live stream. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We still have a few people joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and start with our opening announcements. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the third workshop in our Ministry Fair series, Servants of the Spirit, Gifts for Ministry. Tonight's topic is Digital Media Strategies for Congregations, presented by members of the Diocesan Program Group on Communications. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Ms. Ada Ramirez for providing Spanish translation for today's session. Please be sure to click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select English or Spanish. This session is being live streamed on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel, and the recording will remain available for viewing on demand. A link to that video, along with the resources presented, will also be available on the convention website. We are joined this evening by Canon Bob Williams, historian, archivist, and canon for Common Life for the Diocese, Ms. Marisol Barrios, Program Group Chair and Principal Partner of Mission Driven PR, Dr. Rose Hayden Smith, Communicator and Warden of St. Paul's Parish in Ventura, and Peyton Hoig, Communications Director for the Jubilee Consortium and Seeds of Hope. More information about our presenters and their contact emails can be found in the chat, which I'm going to drop that link in there right now. At this time, I ask everyone to mute yourselves. Anytime you have questions or comments, please do put them in the chat. We'll answer them following each of the presentations. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome our Bishop Diocesan, Bishop John Harvey Taylor, to start off our session. Turn it to you, sir.
Sam, thank you so much. Bishop Bruce, colleagues, friends, fellow sojourners in the wilderness, it is a blessing to be with you this evening as part of this series of workshops in the Diocesan Convention that keeps on giving. We're met at an historic time, so if I may, a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, the darkness sometimes seems to beckon down one road. We're reminded of the shadow of death cast by a historic global pandemic, which has fallen more heavily on some than others because of socioeconomics and other inequities. We're conscious of a spreading public health and economic crisis. Down the other road, the political road, we see turmoil in Washington, violence in the name of democracy, a failure to even be able to agree on a common narrative about a free and fair election. And yet, down your road, down the sometimes bumpy but always trustworthy road of faith, we find good work to do. To learn from our experiences and to as people of faith believe in the power of the risen Christ to accomplish for the sake of your glory and the sake of your people new and wonderful things because of what we've learned from these crises. So we give you thanks for this time together and the expert voices that will be raised. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'll keep my opening remarks brief because in Canon Williams, Marisol, Rose, and Peyton, we have wonderful experts to guide us and teach us, as we will, I know, also be taught and guided by the expert questions that will come from those who are participating, because we're all of us now, or most of us, experts in a kind of worship which a year ago would to almost all of us have been terra incognita. We never would have imagined ourselves executive producers and camera people and key grips and folks who found a way to accomplish the work of the gospel using the means of modern digital communications. And so we're gathered to make sure that we remember to gather what we've learned, and we're well positioned as Anglicans to make the most of this, because first of all, we're believers in the word of the gospel. We're believers in Paul's words that all things work together, even things which are tragic and sad and unfortunate, for God's purposes for them who are in Christ. So we know we can find a way to find redemption even in the darkest experiences of the last year. But also as Anglicans, we're sort of both and people. And so we will go forward into a future in which we'll reclaim much of what we missed. But we've got the opportunity to elaborate that with what we've learned. And I don't think there are going to be easy answers. I don't think there are going to be wrong answers. Bishop Bruce and all of you and I have experienced all different kinds of worship over the last 10 months. I've seen liturgies which have succeeded because they're simplified, because they make it more clear what is being done and said, because those who've assembled the worship are assuming that we have newcomers who aren't as familiar with our practices. And so prayers get shortened, liturgies get shortened. We understand that 60 minutes is about as much as the Zoom pixelated person can endure. And so things have gotten shorter. Even some of my sermons have gotten shorter, which is an extraordinary thing, and certainly good for the glory of God. At the same time, competing with us right now is High Mass at St. Thomas in West Hollywood, where the Reverend Canon Ian Elliott Davis has continued to do church digitally, but in the old-fashioned way, and has had hundreds, sometimes thousands of people coming and seeing an Anglo-Catholic Mass that has not been diminished or compromised in any way. And so all of our adeptness at sort of different forms are still alive, and we're going to be able to keep doing it, and we're going to be able to find a way to turn it all into evangelism. As I introduce the expert in all this who'll bear us through, his portfolio includes ecclesial journalism and communications. And there's an analog here to this, because we live in a era of sort of shortened forms of 140 or 280 word tweets and relatively short Facebook posts. Attention spans are said to be diminishing in the digital era. But in the Diocese of LA, we have an extraordinary core of ecclesial journalists, Canon Williams, and Janet Kawamoto and Pat McCann. And among their specialties are relatively long form pieces, because to tell a complete nuanced narrative, you need a longer text. And one of the things I'm certain about is, even as we learn more about the ins and outs of digital communications, and many who are part of the discussion tonight are advising us in that realm as well, we will never be able to do without long form journalism. Those of us who've been following the events in Washington over the last week, we've learned something from our Twitter feeds, but I've been going to the New York Times and the Washington Post to see the product of skilled reporters who've spent their adult lives and vocations learning how to track down the nuanced truth, and it takes space to do it. So even as we do the new stuff, we will impoverish ourselves if we stop doing the old stuff. And I think that goes for digital worship as well. My colleagues and friends, I give you Canon Bob Williams.
Thank you so much, Bishop, and good evening, friends. We are so fortunate to have you, Bishop Taylor, as our leader in this diocese, a veteran, seasoned ecclesial journalist yourself, and expert of all public affairs, and we feel so well led and so well supported, especially your many Facebook posts and other social media activities that build community. I remember when I started this work with the program group, it's been 35 years this month. And back at the beginning, Barbara Braver, a key mentor, she was communicator in the Diocese of Massachusetts. She said, our goal for diocesan communications is to build community and to make meaning. And I say that again, to build community and to make meaning. And this is so true in our congregations, isn't it? That this is what we're about doing, is building community and making meaning. And believe me, back those many years ago, we did not have email. We did not have fax until a few years in. So when we think of the innovation that has occurred, it is really remarkable, especially here in the media capital of our country and indeed the world. The diocese has been well served for the past 60 years by the program group on communications. Many of the volunteers through the years have been from the Television Academy, from the Los Angeles Times, a volunteer including your mother, Bishop Taylor, Jean Charlie Taylor Lesko, a legendary associate editor of the Times, and Lou Fleming, so many more I could name. But what a thrill to be here with these colleagues this evening, now that we move into this new era. And Sam, I can't thank you enough for being our host and expert guide through this technology. A point that I would like to make before we get started is that we recognize that one size does not fit all. It has been ever thus with diocesan communications and parish communications, that some congregations are very small congregations and need different areas of support, while some of the congregations that are more resourced have a different approach. But what we're about doing in the diocese is sharing expertise, helping one another. And this is what I've seen time and again. It doesn't matter the size of the congregation. Some of our best digital communicators are in the smaller churches. And so they're helping the larger churches to learn, and indeed helping me and the staff to learn. So we're grateful. And I just would like everyone to take a deep breath and feel comfortable here this evening. Please make use of the chat if you would, and put in any questions that you have. If, for example, you'd like to screen share on Zoom, or if you're wondering if YouTube is better than Facebook Live, don't hesitate to put those questions in the chat, and we will answer them. We'll get back to you. If we can't answer it this evening, we will do so. And as to answering questions, you may wish to join us on February the 10th, another Wednesday night, February the 10th, for Social Cafe. Social Cafe Q&A crowdsourcing, led by Dr. Rose Hayden-Smith, whom you'll hear from in just a moment. So we will try to keep these social cafes going monthly and get together and share ideas and best practices. So thank you each for being here this evening. Great to see old friends, and I look forward to making new friends this evening. Without any further ado, I'll hand the program over to our program group chair, Marisol Barrios.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pull up the presentation. I do want to point out that I have a one-page document that I'll be sharing, and you'll have access to, that really identifies the 5-step strategic process that I'm going to go over. So for now, I just want to say that kind of before I start my presentation, is that I call this 5-step GRACE. It's 5-step components: goal setting, research, action planning, communications, and evaluation. Why GRACE? I started the work that I'm doing because I asked God, what is it that his will is for me? Like, what am I supposed to do? What was I passionate about when I was younger? And it comes back to service, being of service. And I'd love to be able to tell stories of missions of people and what they might have been going through, because I remember my childhood moments that impacted me. And I thought I wanted to be able to move people into action. And so with that, as I'm going through my 25+ journey in communications, particularly in the nonprofit sector, I came up with GRACE. It's not new. Race is not new. GRACE certainly is not new. However, without GRACE, we are lost in our journey. And I have found that through this 5-step strategic process that I have implemented in the years that I've been involved in nonprofit communication, it has served a purpose. It has guided me, and it has been a way to transform the work that I've done to generate results. And so I share this with you to let you know that it does work. Okay. And so, why is strategic planning for proposals, for campaigns really important, right? I want to bring this up because we want to get all on the same page. And so what I am presenting is a framework of how you can plan. And as Bishop Taylor had alluded to, who would have thought we were going to be producers, editors, social media coordinators, generating this content digitally and having to do this on an ongoing basis on top of the other many hats we wear, right? And so in order to be able to be effective, we should have a plan. And part of that is carving time to create the plan so that we are proactive and not being reactionary. So I do want to invite you to take the time to schedule it in your calendar, to carve out the time to actually do it. So why is it important? It's because it helps us to just have purpose around what we are communicating and have everyone understand and support the ideas and causes that we're all about. We are able to identify goals and measurable objectives. So without knowing what we're going to measure, we won't know if we're going to be effective, right? There's simple things that you can do for research, things that maybe you already have your hands on already, where that can inform you. And there are data sources like social media insights that you can understand a little bit which posts are doing better, things like that. So you could analyze and do some of the research that helps you improve on certain things that you may be already doing. Or you might just have to do elementary research just to begin with. It helps you to write what your action plan is going to be. In theory, this is what we do and we have to implement it. Then along the way, it helps you identify what are those evaluation measures. How will you know if this works, right? And so, and then we'll go into the five-step PR plan. I just realized I might be going super fast. So how does this support overall church missions? It advances the mission within your parishioners and community. It encourages parishioners to fulfill commitments. So why do I say that in particular? It's because there are certain campaigns you have, certain feasible opportunities that you have embedded in your year plan, typically, right? And so based on that, you assess what your budgets are going to be. And so with that, the level of commitment each parishioner could make and or what you need to fulfill. And so by having those numbers, you're able to better assess what feasible opportunities are going to earn a certain amount, or what additional opportunities you would need to be making available to your parishioners and in the community to support your mission. It helps us to collaborate with others in the operations of the church or organizations to achieve our goals. It helps us, again, support our fundraising efforts and raise awareness of what we're doing, the services, the ministries, and events we host. And then finally, to support the efforts of the Episcopal Church in Los Angeles. So I just want to kind of set the stage for having everyone be on the same page with respect to why it's important that we do strategic planning. I always like to say, plan the work, work the plan. So with that, carving out time to write the plan, and then every week thereafter, taking time to actually produce the results, right? Actually take on the activities. And I say that because right now, I don't know about you, I'm certain other people will probably be feeling the same way I'm feeling, that we can be all zoomed out, right? And so it's so important to take time in your day to schedule a 3-hour chunk, for example, to actually work on the work, right? because you don't want to burn out. And you want to be as effective as you can once you've already written the plan. So goal setting, it's a broad and has long-term impact for the church's survival to fulfill its mission. You need to know what that vision is. You need to know what the purpose is, the direction to plan your action steps. And so the first thing might be, this is just kind of an example, something to share with you. It could be to reach a wider audience through a hybrid of in-person and virtual experiences. It's broad, right? It's broad. So then you move, it answers the question, what do you want to accomplish? Okay, what do you want to accomplish? What would you, I like to say, what is it that, you want the church and parishioners to experience, right? We talked a little bit about meaningful, having meaningful impact in the community and building community too, right? So what would provide those experiences? Research, just so you know, I happen to be a communications adjunct faculty member of Cal State Dominguez Hills. So I teach this to many students. Research is a systemic gathering of information to describe and understand situations and to check out assumptions about publics and public relation consequences. So this is the one step that gets overlooked. Without doing the research and knowing where you stand, like what's happening today at this very moment, we won't know how to improve, to move forward. We, in doing the research, will uncover certain insights, okay? And research can be done before, during, and after as well. And it's part of gathering statistics, the facts, case studies, surveys, different insights, attendance. How many views are you getting? Things like that. Then we have, this answers the question, what's happening now? Strategic action planning. It identifies the measurable objectives, your targeted audiences. You may think that it's just one audience, but based on your objectives, there's various audiences you want to reach. It could be community organizations within your city that have the same audience, target the same audience, and you have complementary missions, but they won't necessarily overlap, right? So partnering with them, you get to leverage the relationships they have with their members, likewise with you, and you're able to serve each other together, as an example. You'd also have strategies, ways to move forward, like how are you going to achieve this? And then messaging, and then the tactics and activities, what I like to call my to-do list. And so, with regards to SMART objectives, SMART standing for specific, measurable. Oftentimes A is for attainable. I like to use it for audience, like who's your audience? So you've got specific, measurable, audience, relevant, and time bound. You want those 5 elements in your objective to have a complete objective. They're going to represent things of specific knowledge, opinion, or behavioral outcomes that you want to achieve for each of your audiences. So this is the think. You're going to have a think, feel, do objective, either one of those, right? And so a couple things that you can do is identify an objective. So, think about what the goal is that you might have and how could that specific objective fulfill in the goal that you have. So for example, with creating a hybrid of in-person and online experiences, it could be when things are back to normal, right? When things go back to normal, moving forward, we know that there have been some benefits of doing things remotely. We have sometimes seen a greater participation online. So why would you not incorporate that? So perhaps you might say, we'll incorporate a monthly online cafe every, throughout the year. so that you have that online experience, and people who aren't able to make it for whatever reason still find themselves being part of the community and be able to participate with you. So I went over the SMART objectives. Answers the question, what should we do and say and why? Okay. Communication, it's a coordinated effort between the strategies and your tactics. Like, these are your to-do lists, things that you need to have done, and things that are going to improve the church's positioning based on what's happening in the environment, right? And perfect example of this is how we had a shift with the safer at home orders last March. We all had to pivot, and we had to work remotely, and we needed to offer different ways of still being part of a community and engaging our parishioners. And so those are the changing pressures in the environment that propel us to do something entirely different that we may not have thought about, but we see the benefits of now. Communications, it's having the message, and each message is going to be very different for your various audiences. So, one of the things that I invite you to do, because so often we are a department of one, is to identify one communications and one social media person to support your public relations and digital team. That's what I invite you to do, because it is so important that we build teams and create teamwork so that we can get more done. We get more done together. It answers the question, how and when do we do and say it? And then finally, we have evaluation, and this is really documenting the measurable results to show how effective you were, right? You want to be able to have a plan and know along the way that you're going in the right direction, or perhaps you monitor at certain points of the timeline and you say, oh, I need to shift this. This didn't work very well. What else could we do that might work better? So when you make that shift at the end, when you summarize your evaluation, then you're going to be able to say, oh, we were effective here because we shifted, or this didn't work even as we try to pursue it for the entire year, something like that, right? So you want to be able to identify, when you're identifying those measurable objectives, what are those metrics and how are you going to measure that for effectiveness? So for example, if you said that you wanted to host a monthly cafe, perhaps your measurement is that you really want to reach an additional 200 individuals in the community. And so how would you measure that? Is through those individuals that register to attend, that actually attend it. Then you identify ways to create the opportunity for people to join those monthly cafes, just as an example. I'm almost there. Answers the question, evaluation answers the question, how are we doing, or how did we do it? And so I summarize this for you. GRACE, again, is goal setting, research, action planning, communications, and evaluation. I do want to point out something that Bob Williams shared earlier about community. We're building community and creating meaning. Right here, when we take the time to plan what we're going to do for communications, PR, and in digital environment, we're creating the plan so that we can communicate meaningful messages, stories of impact, and then build community. So that is the benefit of the 5-step PR process called GRACE. This PowerPoint is available to you. And I also just wanted to point out again that this one-page document does walk you through some questions that you could ask yourselves to get started, and how you can plan for your own communications, public relations, and digital efforts. And this is also can be available to you as well. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Marisol. We're going to take a quick moment. If anybody has any questions or comments about Marisol's presentation, please do put those in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And like she said, those resources are available on the convention webpage where I've been putting information about our ministry fair. So I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for that as well. Both the slides and the one-page resource sheet is there on the website for everybody to access. So do we have any questions? Just go ahead and put those into the chat. We do have a question. Could you review the SMART points, S-M-A-R-T points?
Yes, S is for specific, and I'm going to go ahead and I will also put it in the chat. So S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for audience, like who is your target audience, R is for relevant, realistic as well. So you want to make sure that it's attainable, right? And then T is time bound. You want to have a date by which you're going to fulfill on this.
All right. Any other questions before we move on to the next presentation? Okay. And it's all right. If you think of questions late, we'll get back to them. It's all right. So anytime you think of something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. All right. So then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rose Hayden Smith.
Well, hi, and thank you so much for having me this evening. And I know that it's the end of a long day, and I'll try to keep you engaged. And I'm going to share my screen now. And so I was asked to speak about optimizing messaging and convergence across platform, and basically to provide a case study of St. Paul's Ventura. And I want to thank Reverend Susan Beck for being on the call tonight. And Reverend Susan, I hope that you'll feel free to unmute and jump in, because our digital discipleship program began when Reverend Susan began her ministry at St. Paul's. So we do have digital discipleship. And it's been a convergence of individuals, and I would say open hearts and open minds about the potential around digital communications. And so Reverend Susan came to our congregation, and she had some experience with digital communications and a great interest in them. We had a couple of us in the congregation who were using social technologies in our professional work and personal lives increasingly, and we were blogging and starting to do digital strategy. And then we had in our midst Father Anthony Guillaume, who of course, has done all this digital discipleship at the national level. And he was a great encourager and supporter. So the ethos has been that it is a shared ministry. And so we share posting responsibilities, and it is a team effort. Prior to the pandemic, we did some congregational training, and we shared information with the congregation about what we were doing. And so why people might see cell phones and services. And there was always an invitation extended for people to join us. The emphasis of our digital strategy, the sort of center part of it, has been on Facebook. We started our Facebook account in March 2013. And we had some experience with Facebook Live and streaming prior to the pandemic, which, actually came in really handy. So the way we've organized our work is we have a committee, and the committee consists of clergy, staff, and lay people. We use tools like Google Shared Drives, Canva, Unsplash, Hootsuite. We also, use the platform schedulers. We've tried a range of tools for editorial calendaring, and we have a blog on our website. And our website has evolved in marvelous ways over time. And it also generates social posts, right? So that's been really helpful. So the social platforms that we use are Facebook, Instagram, which we haven't done enough on, YouTube, Twitter, which we could do more on. But again, we've really focused on Facebook, and I think that there are a lot of things that people could take away from our strategy because it does rely on Facebook, which a lot of congregations are using. So we now have, obviously virtual services, and we've got two production teams, and we have an edited service production team and a live stream service production team. These are small teams, and we share these, services on Facebook, YouTube, and the website. And we have links in the email that we send out once a week to make it really easy to click and go and to connect to social accounts. And our digital disciple team used to meet more regularly before the pandemic, but a number of the people, several of the people that work in digital disciples are actually, and it makes sense, are on these small and dedicated production teams that are bringing these services. So I think one of the things that we've done well is that we've optimized Facebook features well. So for years, we've cultivated a habit of using the events feature on Facebook to generate content and provide an easy way for members of our congregation to invite their friends to events. And so we've also, I think, cultivated a very good habit of being responsive and engaging with people, whether it's by the kind of content we post that would elicit response, which Reverend Susan is a genius at that, or whether it is using the feature on Facebook that when someone likes a post, that you can go invite them to like your page. We have groups on Facebook, and these have become very important during the pandemic. So we have our public-facing Facebook page, which has about 2,200 followers. We have a Facebook group page that you have to be a member of the congregation, and that's, I think, got like 156 people, and it's active and it's encouraging and it's a safe place for people to be. And I see a lot of elevating content posted on that. Our other Facebook group is our choir community. And that has been a marvelous source of comfort for the sort of musicians in our parish. And we share and post content between them. We also have taken advantage of Facebook's check-in feature. And that was kind of a habit that people in our congregation got into, that when they went to church, they checked in on Facebook. And that really gave us a more visibility on Facebook. We have recently added a donation button to our Facebook page, which has been really wonderful. It was harder to do than we thought, and our parish administrator, Bonnie Rubrecht, figured it out. We use Facebook Premier, we use the scheduler, and we do boosting on some of our content. So our congregation, our parish, has developed what I would regard as signature content. And I think that the signature content has a lot of potential for the future. And we have a lot of video content around American Sign Language, because Reverend Susan is an interpreter, And then we also have an interpreter who signs our services. And we have had Reverend Susan's daughter has also created some wonderful video content for us. And I think in the future that we will be able to package that and do sort of more targeted outreach to specific audiences like kids or people who want to learn sign language. We also developed this body of content that was produced by our music minister, Felix Eisenhower. And I know Bob in the diocese has shared some of that content. And in the early days of the pandemic, he really sought to minister to people by creating these wonderful piano improvisations with these beautifully, video and slides of nature. And then he would provide a little information about the composition, and we would create a blog. And so now we've developed playlist. And I have to tell you, it's really one of the things that I think we should consider. This is a terrible time, but the wonderful forms of creativity that people have been inspired to. And I think about the Renaissance following medieval times, which some people call, the Dark Ages, and the great burst of creativity. I also think, as a historian, the 1920s and remarkable creativity in literature and art that came out of a very dark wartime and pandemic period. And I think that when we have a chance to emerge from this and look around at our digital landscape, that we're going to be amazed by the inspiring content that was created. So I think future possibilities for us will be perhaps providing more training and technical assistance for the congregation on certain platforms. And one of the models that I have in my head about is if any of you have the iNaturalist app, and the University of California has a program called the Cal Naturalist, and they crowdsource nature content on Instagram from all over the state of California. And it's incredible what volunteers in the program contribute, thousands of people contributing content. I think that we would like to have more increased use of Instagram. Right now, it's sort of a capacity issue with the stories, the reels, possibly IGTV. Increased use of Twitter, because Episcopal Twitter is the best Twitter. Narrative storytelling. And I'm really intrigued with the idea of using the Facebook's units feature, which, if any of you are familiar with it, it may be a good way for us to organize educational content online. And I think for us, it will be formulating a strategy for resurfacing the content that we have, because we have so much content that's been created. And again, it's been really a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to work on digital discipleship and see the growth over time. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Rose. If anyone has any questions, please do put those in the Zoom chat. It looks like we've got a couple so far. Rose, can you say more about having tried a range of tools for editorial calendaring?
Yeah, so we've noodled with all sorts of things, right? We've used Google Docs and Google Sheets. We've trialed Trello, just a bunch of different sort of tools. And what I've noticed, sort of over time, is that our editorial calendar is driven by the liturgical calendar, right? And that we have such an incredible body of content. And Reverend Susan has really had us we've become better over time at photographing things, and we have so much content, and we've gotten better at organizing it. And so we use shared Google Drives to organize a lot of the content. And I was actually just glancing at some of those shared drives in the last week, and I am simply astounded at how much content we have in terms of photos, video, text post, and I think for us and for all of us to consider might be some sort of content management system within the diocese, right, where we could share some of that stuff. I hope that answers the question.
All right, I think so. So next question for you from Bishop Taylor. One imagines that churches have concluded that they can't afford or justify sign language translation because no one in the congregation requires it. A self-fulfilling argument, of course. Has it proved to be a tool for evangelism at St. Paul's?
It's been an interesting journey for us, and we had a big meeting today about our deaf ministry. We have a deaf ministry program with no deaf people in it, except through the online sources, which of course nobody can attend in person right now anyway. What will happen? Will they actually walk in the door once we're back in our physical space? I don't know. It was super safe because people can attend our church without ever walking in the door, without ever leaving the comfort of their own home. But it has really energized our congregation. They have loved learning sign language together. It's helped them to understand a little bit more about diversity and acceptance. And they've been out there in the community signing to people. We're close by to the deaf magnet for both elementary school and middle school, where we happen to be located. And so they're out there in the world signing to people and doing their thing. One of the things we decided at our meeting though this afternoon is that we are going to portion a part of our website and offer resources, ASL resources for free on our website for all Episcopal churches. So we'll start to post in the next few weeks the lessons for every Sunday in an ASL interpreted fashion, so that you feel free to take that and use that if you're doing digital communications, you're doing something with your online services, feel free to edit that in, or to just have that on your website or attach it to your email newsletters or what have you, and share that resource. But then we'll regenerate our ASL minute as well. I just wanted to mention one more thing, because so often it sounds like such a huge thing to go into communications and try all of these wonderful, there's so many things you could do. But those of us who are in the clergy and those of us who are working, volunteering for churches, you don't have a ton of time. And right now, pastoral care takes up so much of our energy. I think the most important thing that we've done in our digital disciples, as each one of us has had various medical challenges or challenges in our families or whatever has happened, we just don't give up. We just keep going. And occasionally you have to drop doing things for a while because other things are a higher priority for a bit, but you just jump back in as soon as you can. The team comes back together, we start all over again, and we never seem to let that discourage us. That it's kind of fallen to pieces for a while, and then, okay, guys, it's time again. And back you go, all for the glory of God, one more time. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. So we have another question for you, Rose. Somebody asked for a copy of your presentation. Just a reminder, all of the slides and the resources available are available on the convention website. I also put a link in the chat specifically to Rose's slides. The next question we have is, how many team members are admin on your FB account, Rose?
Okay, so I think right now we have 7. And so we would have our both of our clergy, myself, Drew Darby, and our parish administrator. And then we have Tara or Felix, one of our music ministers.
All right. Next question. You say you have a blog on your website. Can you expand on that? Also, when you say your website generates social posts, do you mean that the two are more than just linked?
Okay, so we have a blog, and we in the past have used it more long form pieces. And I agree with what was said earlier by Bishop Taylor about the value of long form pieces, and they get a lot of engagement, right? And so the blog, when I'm doing, or if anyone's doing a blog post, you have an option for it to sort of just, take a part of your blog and the link and post it on the linked social accounts. And so, that you get some efficiency, right? If you don't then have to go and schedule it separately.
All right. Thank
And
you.
remember, every time you blog, you're getting new content for SEO, right? So you're updating your web page anytime you blog.
All right. Okay. Do we have any more questions for Rose? If you do, please put them in the chat, Marisol or Rose. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Peyton. If you have any questions or comments, again, throw them in the chat. We're here to answer them. So I turn it over to you now, Peyton.
Thank you so much, Sam. Good evening to everyone. I want to thank you for putting another Zoom meeting on your agenda for this evening. I'm sure you guys are pretty zoomed out already, as we all are. So I appreciate you showing up tonight. I'm going to share my screen with you all. And I also just want to say a quick thank you to my far more esteemed colleagues here for allowing me to share the digital stage with them. And I'm going to go back to my opening slide. So my presentation tonight is focused on being church in the digital age. And specifically, it speaks to leveraging our present moment in order to build for the future. We are in the middle of a trying time, and the circumstances we're going through are historic. However, the ways in which we've learned to adapt are going to serve us well moving forward. I believe that wholeheartedly. Your church's web presence certainly matters. It certainly matters now during COVID-19, and it will certainly matter tomorrow as well when we're through all of this. And I say that speaking as a young person in the church who's seeking congregations, parishes, and a general church that speaks to who I am and how I live my life. We are members of a digital age. This is a new era for the church and for the world. And digital communications is a matter of evangelism. Times have changed, and we can certainly attest to the fact that long-form journalism is important, and it holds true to this day. But we as a church have to be willing and able to acknowledge the ways in which our world is changing and the tools that we're being offered in this new era to spread the good news of Christ's love. And digital media falls in that category. COVID-19 has brought so much of the church's work online. And in the post-COVID world, when we are able to return to our congregations and to our church parishes and buildings, we cannot afford to forget the lessons that this pandemic has taught us. Now, there's a few things that I want to highlight that I feel we as a church broadly have learned, and as people of faith, we've learned during this time of pandemic. Now, since COVID-19 has become our new reality, our world has seen a drastic shift, and much of that shift has been from what we would call the real world to the digital space. And some interesting and I think important statistics for us to acknowledge and consider is that there's been a 25% increase in social media consumption since the start of COVID-19. There's also been a 50 to 70% increase in web traffic globally And so that varies depending on where you're located and situated. But that is a drastic increase in web traffic during these past few months. And there's also been a 75% increase in online streaming. In large part, churches have responded to the needs of this present moment. We've shifted our worship from our church buildings and our beautiful worship spaces to virtual forums. And we found ways to have online service offerings. We've also embraced, in large part, social media as an important communications tool for reaching our community and for engaging our parishioners. Those two things speak to the fact that we are continually recognizing the importance of an online presence in the church. Now, what I want to keep us cognitive of is that we cannot, when COVID ends, just go back to the way things were. Prior to the pandemic, we were not living in a perfect space. Those of you who serve the church, who attend regularly, know that there were issues that we were dealing with prior to the rise of this pandemic. Mainline Protestant denominations had seen a marked decline in recent years, and a whole new category of nuns, as they're called, has been widely documented, both in polling, surveying, and in media coverage. And the church has been in this process of wrestling with this new reality and finding ways to build on its traditions in order to assert its relevance in a new time. And I would say that because of the shifts that we're making, because of the creative ways that we've adapted in recent months, we're well placed to build on that work and modernize our church offerings, expand our digital media communications efforts in order to reach young people, but also those who rely on digital communications who exist in a virtual space on the day-to-day. Now, when I speak about an online presence, I speak about a couple of things in particular. Now, as a millennial, I don't remember the last time I went to a restaurant because of COVID-19, but I also don't remember the last time I went to a restaurant without first checking online to look at their website. I don't remember the last time that I went anywhere without checking online to see reviews. And as a graphic designer, if a restaurant or a business's website is not clean and beautiful, I probably won't go into that business. And I would say that that's a reality that's not just one of my character traits. I would say it goes far beyond me and applies to many young people like me. Now, your church website is the very first thing that many people who are not already involved in your community will see. When they Google the name of your church, or when they search for a church in their area and your church appears on that list, they will navigate and see what you are putting out there. And so that's why it's so crucial that we be thoughtful and intentional about what it is that we're putting out into the world. What is it that we are showing the world about who we are, what we believe, and the things that matter to us? Careful, intentional, purposeful construction of a beautiful and practical website is absolutely essential to the work of the church. It really does introduce your community to the world. And what is wonderful about the age and era that we're living in is that that's not the only thing that the church has to offer. The website is not the only thing, nor is our Sunday worship the only thing that we have to give to the world. And our social media can be used as a tie-in to our centralized hub at the website level in order to continue to tell our story and add a level of richness to the narrative that we're sharing. So I encourage all of those that I work with, all of those who contract with me, to really put intention and thought into their website and to tie their Facebook, Instagram, and social media accounts into the website. Now, I don't mean that in the sense of pushing content immediately, although that is a good thing. But one of the greatest points of advice that I've heard in the communication space came from a dear friend on our program group from Fuzzy Media, who reminded us to keep our social media icons above the fold on our websites. Those icons for Facebook and Instagram, Twitter or YouTube need to be clear and visible and apparent to anyone who visits our websites so that they know that we're operating in multiple spaces. So alongside your centralized hub of your website, your social media accounts and platforms can serve as very, very essential and useful tools for telling the story of your community. As people of faith, we come from a rich tradition of storytelling, and we need look no further than our own sacred scriptures for that. Now, that is why I believe that the work that we are doing in the digital media space is so important. What we have are vital tools for continuing to tell the story of Christ, of universal love, and of community building that's going on in our congregations, parishes, and communities. If we do not use these tools, we would be remiss. Our social media platforms are powerfully constructed to allow us to share beautiful visual content that can reach people. And we need to be intentional and thoughtful about the content that we create and the content that we share in order to reach the world. I would argue that by engaging these tools, by using them effectively, we're able to go a long ways towards asserting and demonstrating the continued relevance and necessity of the church and our church communities for the world. Now, there's a few things that I would like to just highlight as keys for all of us as we cultivate what we can consider a successful web presence. And that, as I kind of mentioned, involves a centralized hub of an online website and our social media platforms. Organization is absolutely key. Things should be clean, legible, easily navigable. Consistency and maintaining a schedule, allowing people to know that there's going to be content for them that they're going to want to see, involving posting on a regular schedule. That is absolutely vital. Connectivity in ensuring that your website and social media channels are all connected, that the content that you put on your blog, on your website, like Rose mentioned, also is pushed to your social media. And then finally, as a designer, I have to highlight visual appeal. Making content beautiful, colorful, and memorable will go so far in showing people that this is something that you care about. And when we show that we care about things like our digital media communications, it's easy for them to see that we care about them as well. And then what I consider to be the most crucial of all the things that we have to keep in mind when we are doing digital media communications is authenticity. Now, this is a term that comes up a lot as we're talking about reaching young people as a church. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I see churches' social media platforms and websites trying to be something that they're not. And when they do this, they typically do it poorly. Authenticity is absolutely key. So using the platforms that you're given, the tools that we have in the digital media field, in order to speak with your voice and with that of your community is so very important. Even in an online space, you should continue to be you. Shape your message and speak it in your voice so that you can reach the people that you care about. There's a few apps, software, and resources that I want to highlight for you guys this evening, just because I know that as leaders in the church, as congregants in the church, and those who care and love the church, we recognize that the church works on volunteer time. And if you're clergy, you work on borrowed time most of the time because you're working 48 hours in 24. So digital media does not have to be time intensive, and it does not have to be hard if we work smart. And I mean smart in addition to the smart way that Marisol mentioned earlier in her presentation. There are some key resources that I use on a daily basis that I recommend to all the people that I work with and all the people that I talk to about this digital media work. For design, Canva is your absolute best friend. It is a free resource for nonprofits. You can get a pro account for absolutely free. And that opens up stock photos and images for you. It has a myriad templates for Facebook posts, Instagram, for your Facebook cover photos, for presentations. Canva is absolutely an essential tool that I and my team use, and I would recommend it to anyone. Affinity is for those who need to do a little bit more in the design space, something that goes a little bit deeper than Canva. It is not a subscription like Adobe is, and that's why I recommend it for churches. It's a one-time fee for photo editing and also for vector graphic editing. And that's relatively low cost considering the tools that you're offered. Pixabay is an excellent stock photo website. I'd recommend everyone getting to know an excellent stock photo resource. For video editing, which we're all doing so much more of, iMovie is an excellent resource. I'm sure many churches are using iMovie now. It's simple, clean, and easy to use, and I'd recommend it every day of the week. For those of you who aren't on Apple computers, Openshot is a free open source video editing software that is similar to iMovie and accessible for churches. And then VidEasy allows access to free stock video footage. A couple of the churches that I serve uses VidEasy for background footage for meditative videos and meditation. For content management, building an online website, I recommend Squarespace wholeheartedly, just because it's simple, easy, and accessible. WordPress is also an excellent system, and Weebly is very, very easy to use as well. So in this day and age, you do not have to be a coder. You do not have to have attended school for design or for communications to build a website. There are resources out there for you to build something beautiful and clean and accessible. So I recommend everyone do that. Now, I have a couple of case studies just that I want to offer in addition to some of that those resources that I shared, just as a way of getting you excited about this work and giving you some insight into what's possible, in addition to the great work that Rose offered to you earlier this evening. So I serve with St. Stephen's in Hollywood, which is a very small community. It is family-oriented, bilingual English and Spanish, and it is very much a dialogue-centered space. St. Stephen's does not have the resources or the funds to do everything as clean and wonderfully and beautifully as one would hope. However, we've been able to kind of, from our shoestrings, create a wonderful communications strategy and plan. And one of the things that I think is unique to St. Stephen's and to the ways that we've adapted to the pandemic is this reunion event that St. Stephen's planned and put on. So after a few weeks of being locked down away from the community, and when we were really starting to feel the separation, because St. Stephen's is a family-centered, dialogue-oriented church, we started to miss one another. And so I work with a wonderful team of young designers and communicators, sat down and to think about ways that we could get the church to reconnect with one another, how we could reintroduce our congregants to one another and provide a space similar to the kind of family gatherings that we have on a Sunday. And one of my colleagues came up with this wonderful idea of a Zoom reunion. And it included all of those things that we know from our family reunions. The great food that we typically share in a family reunion was kind of the food of the word, and our clergy shared from scripture right at the outset of our programming. We included a line dance segment so that we could get up and move together, and the congregation had a blast just seeing one another on Zoom, line dancing, and enjoying music and fun times together. And then what was absolutely key to this event was we created a space for listening. And that's something that I think that I need to reiterate for all communicators, and I need to remind myself of it very, very often, is that we need to be active in listening to our community. We need to be active in listening to our audience to hear what they need and what they want. So in addition to the fun, dancing and sharing the word and catching up with one another, we took time in this reunion event to listen to what people needed during this time of isolation and dealing with the realities of COVID-19. And from that, my communications team was then able to build a communication strategy based on the needs of the community. We were able to shift gears, and things that we thought were genius strategies and brilliant, beautiful content, we scrapped it because we realized that it's not what the community needed at that time. So another final piece and case study to share comes from another congregation that I work with, St. B. Now, St. B is actually a sister congregation now to St. Stephen's. It's a congregation that St. Stephen's is helping to revive and revitalize. That process started shortly before the pandemic. And so it hadn't had an opportunity really to build up its community, to build those bonds and connections. And so when we started to kind of talk about and think about the ways that we could strategize and implement digital media that would be relevant and helpful for the St. B community, we had to think about who the St. B community was at that time. And St. B's is located in Eagle Rock. And so even though the community itself was still very small, it was a bilingual community, English and Spanish. What we realized about St. B was that it was very community oriented, very community centered, and that it was a creative community from the very start. It didn't have traditional Sunday morning services. They did an evening service that was focused on music. And so that was a difficult thing to adjust to during COVID. And so another wonderful, brilliant colleague came up with the idea of St. B's Melodies, which was a hybrid offering of St. B's, live streamed on Facebook and through Zoom, of the St. B's worship team set up in the courtyard of St. Barnabas, which is right off the road. And so we set up cameras, we put lawn chairs in socially isolated spaces, And we allowed people to drive up and park on the road and listen to an evening of music. And we had a tremendous response, not only from the St. Bees community, but from people who have just been missing the music of the church. And not only that, but because the church is situated pretty close, in close quarters to a neighborhood, the neighbors in the community opened their doors, opened their windows, brought chairs out onto their lawns and on their porches, and enjoyed an evening of music that they hadn't been able to appreciate for months. And it was just a way for St. Bees to assert the fact that it's still here. And that's what I want to really highlight for us tonight, is that even in the midst of COVID-19, in the midst of this pandemic, as Bishop John reminded us right at the outset of our evening together, there is still good work to be done. And what I want to commend us all for doing is for engaging that work and for being creative in the ways that we go about doing it. But I do want to challenge us not to just fall back into old patterns when the world reopens, to learn from the lessons that we've been taught in these past few months and be willing to innovate, to be willing to reconsider what church is and what church can be for the world. And I think that we will all be better for it. My email is here on this closing slide. And my website's on here as well, a little bit wonky, but it wouldn't be a presentation if there wasn't an error. So jubileeconsortium.org is our website. If you want to check us out, we're under Programs Jubilee Media, and I'm happy to help and support you in any way I can. And I want to thank you again for this evening.
All right. Thank you so much, Peyton. We have had a couple questions come in. So if anyone else has any questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. Let's see what we got so far. When you were talking about consistency and regularly posting and updating, we got a question. Can you talk about what a schedule might look like?
Yeah, for my team, we really focus on a handful of content items that we feel reflects our community, that speaks to who our community is. So, and we create a plan for how often we're going to share. So I recommend, especially now, to be careful in how often we're sharing, how often we're doing kind of virtual services so that we don't wear out our audience, so that people are kind of waiting to hear from us. And so a schedule for example, for St. Stephen's would include kind of a Monday, when we started out in the pandemic doing a Monday prayer service online. So that was our content for Mondays. We'd take a day off to let that sit, to allow the audience to come and see that, because live streams on Facebook are available in perpetuity. And then on Wednesday, we'd update people with a Wisdom Wednesday quote, perhaps, as well as kind of our offerings, schedule of our offerings for that upcoming Sunday and for the coming weeks. And then on Friday, we would share content for what was coming up on Sunday. That may include kind of the readings for the week so that people can prepare, and then just a little reminder to come and join us on Sunday. And it's as simple and easy as that. Doing those things with consistency, finding those things that really are needed in your community, and then committing to doing that on a regular basis. I would encourage you not to get locked in to your schedule so much that you're not willing to post outside of those parameters, because in addition to your schedule, I always encourage clients and those who work with me to post mementos of your community on a regular basis. People want to see you. They want to see your community. They want to see who you are. And they also want to see the things that you value and what you believe in. And so I encourage, kind of outside of the scheduled content that is kind of pre-created, to be adaptable and to be cognizant of what's going on in the world and how that relates to your community. So for St. Stephen's and St. Barnabas, when everything has happened recently with the events around the Capitol, we've shared messaging from both Bishop John and from our national church diocesan bishop, in order to signal to our audience, to our community, what we believe and the things that we value. And I think that that's an important thing that we have to do in digital media.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
I think
Hope
so.
so.
I think so. If it didn't, please post a follow-up question in the chat. Next question, what do you recommend for MP4s, especially to combine MP3s and video? I'm thinking of specifically creating music to provide a congregational singing experience.
I would recommend iMovie for anything that involves video if you're working on the Apple ecosystem, just because it's the easiest and most accessible. That's really, for me, key is ease of use and the user experience. Everyone is wearing enough hats. You don't have to learn a new software. And iMovie is pretty straightforward. If you're working on a PC, Openshot was the one that I listed on my resources slide. That's the one that I use on a regular basis. It doesn't have quite the ease of use of iMovie. It's not quite as clean and full. Not much is compared to Apple. But Openshot is also an excellent way to create video using MP4s and MP3.
All right. Next question, what are your thoughts on Wix?
What are my thoughts on Wix? I know of Wix. I know colleagues who have used it in the past. It's not the most well supported of the content management systems out there. And so I don't necessarily recommend it to my clients. If you're going to use content management like Wix, I recommend Squarespace just because it's very well supported, and it has a huge user base. And usually when it has a huge user base, the company supports it very well. So I recommend Squarespace because it's a very simple platform.
Okay. All right. Next question that we have, what is the balance between clip art or stock footage and authenticity? What they show and where we are is visually different from what is online. Yeah,
that's a tough one for me just because it is difficult to get beautiful photography. I have a tendency to lean towards stock photos and footage for at least some website design, just because I'm guaranteed a beautiful photo. However, I recommend against relying too heavily on stock photos and footage, just because it does not reflect the authentic community. So what I recommend in that, in its stead, is to find a photographer who's connected to your community, who's willing to give you an afternoon. I worked with a church in Fullerton here last year who hired a photographer for one Sunday service. And from that single Sunday service, they got an archive of probably 80 fabulous photos of the worship space, of a worship service. And so it doesn't take a huge investment. You don't have to hire someone you don't know. Usually there's someone in your congregation who can help you out. And what's wonderful about the world we're living in now is that you don't have to have a $5,000 camera to get beautiful photos and video anymore. Anyone with a smartphone, usually a high-end phone, but even mid-range smartphones these days have fabulous cameras that will give you beautiful photos. So anyone who can just dedicate time to take some photos of your community, task them with that. But definitely, if you don't have the perfect photo and it doesn't feel right to use a blurry one, please don't use blurry photos. stock photos are a good alternative.
Okay. Next question. By messaging, do you mean social media posts or email communications?
All of the above. Everything that we do in this digital media space is messaging. Everything that we put out for the world to see is our message. It's what we're telling the world about who we are, what we value, what we believe. So that's what I mean when I say messaging. I definitely mean in some cases kind of our social media content, but as digital media communicators, as strategists, we have to think big picture, umbrella messaging, and be on brand and be consistent.
Okay. How many email messages do you send to your congregation each week?
I've had mixed results using regular email communications. I recommend no more than 2 a week. And B, as Marisol mentioned in her presentation, evaluate. Pay attention to your analytics, how often your emails are being opened, how often you're getting clicks on those emails. And if your emails aren't being opened, if people aren't clicking on the content, then they're telling you something. They're telling you that this isn't something that they need. So adapt, find another way. I found our congregations that we've worked with find that text SMS messaging is far more effective compared to email marketing. It's similar as far as cost. Most congregants have a phone that will receive messages for free, and it's a way where someone can receive messaging like that. And I would definitely recommend exploring that.
Okay. All right. Last question that I have so far. This is a follow-up to the last question. They're asking about Wix. GoDaddy. I understand that Squarespace support is email-based. What do you think about GoDaddy?
Can you repeat that one? Sorry.
GoDaddy. That was a follow-up to the question about Wix. As far as content hosting, what are your thoughts on GoDaddy? Because the person asking the question understands that Squarespace support is email-based.
Squarespace support is email-based. GoDaddy hosts your domain. And so it's not necessarily a content management system. It's not the platform through which you typically build and construct your website. GoDaddy is where you would kind of purchase your domain, and they provide the server space for your website. What you construct your website through is the content management system, and so that would be Wix, Squarespace, or platforms like it. And so I definitely think that GoDaddy is an excellent platform for hosting your URLs and for providing a server for your website. But it's connected but separate from the content management platforms.
Yeah, Rose put a follow-up in the chat. She says that Squarespace also has chat support. She has 2 websites on it, loves it. And actually, I run the convention website on Squarespace. All right, so we have another question. Do you have any high-level thoughts about paid versus organic reach on social media? Is it worth having an ad budget for social?
That's a great question, and it's one that involves a level of self-reflection and community reflection. It depends on, going again back to something that Rose and Marisol have touched on. It goes back to kind of your purpose. What are you looking to do? If what you're looking to do is to reach your community, it may not be worth the investment. If what you're doing is trying to kind of create content and messaging for your church, if you're trying to grow your church, if you're trying to attract new members of your community to a particular event, then it can be worth your time and your investment. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend investing in paid reach for social media content that's just your day to day. I wouldn't boost or put an investment into like our Wisdom Wednesdays or something like that. For something that would be open to the community, that would really showcase who we are as a community, I may invest a modest amount to just build the reach. We've definitely used investments. We've invested a small amount of money in social media reach on Facebook, specifically to expand the reach of content that had to do with the church's preschool. And that's specifically because there's a very clear return on investment on that. All you really need to do is attract one family from that paid post in order to pay for it. So you really do want to consider what's going to be the return on your investment.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite anybody that's watched this live stream or has attended this session. If you have follow-up questions on the convention website, I do have that page with our presenter bios and email contact information. By all means, send us more questions. But for now, we're going to wrap it up. So thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to our presenters. As a reminder, the recording of today's session is posted on the Diocesan Facebook page and YouTube channel. The resources will be available on the convention website. I also want to do a quick follow-up announcement. As was mentioned earlier, the program group will be hosting a follow-up series called the Social Cafe. It will be a regular opportunity for informal drop-in conversations and questions about the effective use of social media and communications in our work. It will be a 1-hour session with a tutorial of a tool or a feature commonly used on social media platforms, or a brief showcase of an individual or institution in the diocese that's using digital communications in innovative and effective ways. So more information about that will be available on the convention website. For gifts of ministry, for Servants of the Spirit Gifts of Ministry, the next session that we'll be having is this Saturday, January 16th at 9 a.m. Our next workshop is entitled Workshop for Wardens, hosted by Steve Yazel and Bishop Catherine Roscom. For more information and the link to register, please visit, again, the convention website. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to our attendees, to our presenters. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all so much.